Hello, and welcome to Thinkling's Books. My name's Deborah, and today we're going to be talking about what makes great action scenes. So buckle on in and make sure you stay to the very end because I have a very exciting announcement. But first, great action. In any great action scene, your number one duty as a writer is simply to keep your reader engaged, both for that particular scene and in anticipation for future action scenes. And there are 4 elements that I want to discuss to do with achieving this. They are stakes, variety, twists, and consequences. I'm not going to talk at too great of length at stakes because I have a dedicated video on the topic, but there are 2 specific elements of stakes that I did want to discuss, and they are clarity and layers. Let's start with layers. By layers here, I mean that it's not just physical stakes. You will, of course, have physical stakes in almost any action scene, but the really great action scenes also have an emotional component. For example, Kenshin. In Kenshin, our protagonist used to be an assassin, but he's given up those evil ways and he swears that he will never kill another person. He will fight, but only using the blunt side of his sword. But then an old enemy comes to town. And so our stakes are, 1, can Kenshin actually defeat his old enemy using only the blunt sword? And 2, more importantly, can he do this? Can he beat him without reverting to the sort of person he used to be? The other important element of stakes is clarity. This both has to do with knowing what you're getting into going in and clarity during the action scene. Knowing what you're getting into going in is basically having stakes for the reader to care about during the action scene, which is why it's so incredibly difficult and risky to start the book in the middle of an action scene, especially if it's the first book and not a later book in the series. And I will talk about that topic more in a future video on hooks. But what I want to focus on here is clarity inside of an action scene. And the place I usually see difficulty with this is actually in the biggest, most climactic final action scene of the book. The one you want to be the clearest. It's like, okay, say you're an enormous football fan and your favorite team is about to play against their biggest nemesis. And so you sit down in front of your TV and you turn it on and whoever's filming the game has a blur filter on? Or shaky cam? You know why you care. But you don't know when to cheer. There's movement, but it's all a big blur. Please don't do that to your reader. It's frustrating and it's bad writing. Make sure that your reader is able to follow along with what's going on in the action scene and with who's winning or losing and continuing what the stakes are, especially if they are changing throughout this action scene because of variety or twists. By variety, as one of our 4 major points, I'm referring to both variety between action scenes and variety within a particular action scene. So for variety between an action scene, you don't want, oh, we have an action scene where Inigo is fighting into the Men in Black. And then in the next action scene, it's Inigo fighting against the Men in Black, but they're 10 feet away from where they were before. And then in the next action scene, it's the same. No, what you want is, we have a scene with the Men in Black against a sword fighter, and then the Men in Black against a giant in physical combat, and the Men in Black against a poisoner in a game of wits, and then against a forest full of rodents of unusual size and pit holes, and so on and so forth. In fact, the only time that you should have 2 action scenes for which the setup is essentially identical is when you're providing a purposeful parallel. Usually this is done where you want to show growth in your character, or it's bookends. So at the very beginning, the bully is picking on your protagonist and is beating him up, and your protagonist can't do anything to fight back. But at the end, after your protagonist has learned how to fight and gone through all these struggles, either A, they beat up the bully, or B, they are now such a big person that the bully looks small and they're just not going to engage, and they're emotionally okay with that. Either way, it's a purposeful parallel to show change by using both the similarities and the differences, specifically by using the similarities to highlight the differences. But beyond that, vary up your action sequences. Have one be sword-to-sword combat, have one be a chase sequence where your protagonist is being chased, and then the next one, your protagonist could be doing the chasing, or maybe have a twist, a reversal within the action scene in which the hunter becomes the hunted. One of the best, I'll get to twist in a moment, but one of the best tools for providing variety within an action scene is setting. Now you can use character development to promote interest within an action scene and variety, and you can use twists, as we'll discuss in a moment, but setting is a big one, because setting changes a lot, and it also brings a feeling of realism into the setting, because if you do have two people sword fighting, they're not going to just swish their swords back and forth. And you can provide some variety by giving actual techniques and not having such a limp wrist while holding your sword. Consulting experts is good. Do your homework. I should also do a future video on that. But, setting. Jim Butcher does this very well in his Dresden Files series. He has action scenes that are more than 50 pages long that never repeat themselves and never lose the reader's interest. But when it comes to film, the simplest place to look is Jackie Chan. When Jackie Chan is fighting someone in a room, and there's a table and a chair and a broom, that table, that chair, and that broom will be used. They might be used as obstacles or as weapons, or to change the relative heights of the fighters, or to vault off of. But in some way they will be used. And if you run out of tools to use within one room, change your setting. Leave the room, go somewhere else. I've used this technique myself. It's so useful. If you just have two people punching each other and you're thinking, how do I make this interesting? Close your eyes and visualize what else would realistically be in this room and how realistically impact people. If you have a sword and you're fighting in close quarters, is that going to cause problems? Depends how good your sword fighter is, but probably. So make sure you do your homework with that too. But I said earlier that I was going to talk about twists, and I am. Twists within an action scene, at their most basic level, are simply the action scene does not go precisely as the reader expects. Now, you don't have to have an enormous reversal. It doesn't have to be you thought this character would win and then this character lost. Although that is a great and valid twist to have, and I recommend trying it out sometime. But it can be simply as, our two characters are fighting and you expect, since he's a great swordsman, to be able to win with a sword, but then he's disarmed and he has to grab a gun to win. Again, twist. One of the great things about having twists within a single action scene is that it raises stakes and interest for future action scenes. Because the reader is no longer thinking, I know exactly how this is going to go when they come to the next action scene. Instead, they're thinking, I'm not sure I know how this is going to go. Or perhaps, I have absolutely no clue how this is going to go. But I really care. For the most part. As long as they make sense. The bigger the twist, the better. As long as they make sense means don't break your narrative promises over this. If you just had 400 pages in medieval England and you have a big fight scene tournament, having your characters suddenly transported aboard the Starship Enterprise, in addition to being a copyright violation, is not a good twist, because it's just like, that's not what we were promised. That came out of nowhere. But the biggest The biggest twist that makes sense within your universe and isn't the same as the previous twist you had is, generally speaking, the most potent, especially if it brings in old information to new light and makes the character say, "So that's what was going on. Oh dear." Oh dear is a great thing for your readers to say during your action scene, because unless it's a curb stomp battle just meant to show how awesome your protagonist is, having your protagonist spend a lot of time losing does tend to raise sympathy for the underdog. There is one other element, in addition to twists, that can raise the stakes enormously for the next action scene, and that is consequences. So by consequences here, I mean, don't make your action scene inconsequential. Don't have an action scene which, if you removed it entirely and made a few minor cosmetic changes, your audience would basically not notice. Writers, both of books and of movies, tend to fall into this pit hole of thinking, well, I just need an action scene to get the adrenaline going, so I'll just shove one in. Doesn't matter. This works at first, but what's ultimately doing is shooting themselves in the foot. Because near the end of the action scene, if your audience realizes it doesn't matter, they'll stop caring. On rereads, it will turn into a popcorn break, and it will create this expectation in the readers that further action scenes also don't matter, which basically erases the entire stakes. Even if they don't know this, but the action scene does matter, you've created this assumption in them that it doesn't. And even if it did, since there's no variety or twist, they know exactly how it's going to go, and why do we care? Why are we reading it? Where are the stakes? Alright, there aren't any. Actions need to matter. Stakes need to matter. Twists need to give unexpected turns, and so does variety. And together, they can make great action scenes. Now, I do want to put all four of these elements together to demonstrate how you can use them to build your own action scene. I thought about using a couple of really great action scenes I love, such as the end fight scene in the second arc of Bleach between Byakuya and Ichigo, but I decided not to, because since one of the elements of a really great action scene is a massive twist that just makes the reader go, and great action scenes have that, I don't want to ruin them for you. Go watch Bleach, go read the Dresden Files, and enjoy. Here is an original action scene that you can use as sort of a model to building your own. I say action scene, but I actually mean action sequence, because I'll put two action scenes back to back so you can see the variety between action scenes. So let's begin. Our protagonist's name is Jane. We don't know a lot about her backstory. She just showed up a couple of years ago. She was adopted by this family, and they've come to love her, and she's come to love them, and it's clear that she has some quite unusually amazing fighting skills, and also that she hates the Mad King, who is the ruler, the evil overlord of the land. And then something happens. The evil overlord sends his lieutenant to go and track her down. And although she escapes, the lieutenant ends up killing a beloved member of her family, creating our first layer setup for emotional stakes. Then, in this time, he also releases a toxin that infiltrates the water and is slowly killing everyone in the town. Everyone Jane has come to care about. And she knows that the only way to save their lives is to break into the Mad King's palace while he's away and steal the magic healing stone from his vault. Initial stakes, both physical for the people in her town, and also physical stakes for her because this is dangerous, and we know that the lieutenant has already been after her, although hopefully he's away at this point. So we have the first of our two action scenes, and it is your breaking into a place type heist adventure action scene. She is dodging around guards. She is hiding from the magical equivalent of security cameras. She is going through obstacles and maybe she fights off a giant beast and loses her sword in the process. So unarmed, she has to make it through booby traps. And finally she gets to the vault and twist. It's empty, save for the lieutenant. The thing she's come for isn't there. And now he's after her, and she tries to run because she's unarmed. She can't fight him. And as she runs and he gives chase, and she is ducking and rolling and jerking from side to side and maybe getting scratched by his sword, they're talking back and forth. And in their conversation, it becomes clear that not only do they know each other, they used to work closely together. But how can this be? The lieutenant works for the Mad King. And Jane hates the Mad King. Did she used to be in his employ? This is strange. But while she's running, she realizes getting away isn't enough. She can no longer save her family, but she can avenge them. And she is a better fighter than the lieutenant. She just has to get a weapon. But where shall she get a weapon? She runs, she doesn't know the layout of the palace, and then she hears a tea kettle singing. There is a kitchen nearby. She bursts into the kitchen, maybe pushing past the cook, pushing him out of the way, but because he was in the way, she didn't see his cat. Environmental variety, also changing room to room. She trips over his cat. She hits the prep table and rolls off and runs into a bag of lentils, also known as a weapon. She grabs a handful of weapons, and just as he's stabbing down, throws it in the lieutenant's face, distracting him long enough that she can leap to her feet and reach behind her and grab that boiling hot kettle and swing at him with an arc of water coming out behind. And he parries it. But she fights hard enough with it that he has to back up, and this gives her the space she needs, another environmental factor, to jump up onto the prep table, giving her the high ground and allowing her to grab an 8-inch chef's knife. And now she's armed, and we know she's a stronger fighter than he is. And furthermore, because it's an enclosed space, there are advantages to having the shorter blade. And they fight back and forth with a variety of footwork and techniques, and perhaps a few exchanges of dialogue. But twist, something is going terribly wrong. In the years since she's been away, the lieutenant has upped his fighting skills. And now he is better than she is, and he's winning, and he's pushing her back, and then he wins. He shoves his sword through her shoulder and pushes her back against the red hot burner, and she can smell and hear her hair sizzling, and she knows that at any moment it's going to light on fire, but she can't get away. She has a sword through her shoulder, and it hurts, and she's in shock, and she knows she's going to die, and then twist. The grip slackens, she's able to straighten, the lieutenant crumples to the ground, and behind him is standing the Mad King himself. And she is horrified, and he says, "I've saved your life. You are now in debt to me. You will have to do what I say to pay it off." And she says, "I'm not that sort of person anymore," and grabs the sword, and hopefully it's a short enough sword she can do this. She pulls it out of her shoulder to fight him, and he says, "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Not if you want to save your family's lives. Work for me, obey me, do as I say, as you once did, and I will use my magical stone to heal them." Consequence. Whatever happens next, it's going to take more than cosmetic differences to remove this action scene. Everything has changed. Maybe she can still get the stone, but only if she works for him. If she turns around and leaves, her family dies. And of course, she can try tricky things, back and forth cleverness. The point is, this action scene, full of the variety and the stakes and the twists, it matters. And what happens next has been impacted by it in unpredictable ways to keep the reader engaged. And that is how you write a great action scene. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video on action. If you found it at all interesting or helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe and ring the notification bell to learn of new uploads. And before you go, I need to tell you my announcement. My new book is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. I will put a link in the description. It is spy thriller fantasy, full of lots of action and plenty of twists and turns and consequences. It's currently available for pre-order only in ebook form, although it will be coming out in both ebook and paperback on January 1st. And Thinklings Books always releases books, although through Kindle, without the DRM locked, because we want you to be able to enjoy our books on any type of e-reader. And having the DRM unlocked allows you to easily and legally convert it. In fact, I will link a free-to-download, user-friendly ebook converter in the description below, along with a website that will convert your books online. I hope you go and check out my very exciting book on Amazon now. I will give more details about it in future videos, and there should be a preview of it available. Until next time!